A dog refused to leave a dying baby's side. And what happened next shocked everyone. At first, people thought the dog had gone mad, snarling and pawing at the crib as the mother screamed for help. But then, something far worse was discovered. The baby wasn't just sick. Someone had done this. And the only creature that seemed to know the truth was the one everyone wanted to blame. As the mother fights to save her child and protect the dog who tried to warn her, the lies around them begin to crack open, revealing a secret so dark it could destroy everything she thought was safe. Who can she trust when the system turns against her? And what will she do when the one accused of being dangerous turns out to be the only one telling the truth? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Little Lanterns Daycare as Tessa Whitlock walked down the brightly decorated hallway. Her German Shepherd mix, Bishop, padded quietly beside her, his nails clicking softly against the linoleum floor. The walls were covered with finger paintings and construction paper art projects, but Tessa barely noticed them today. Her mind was already focused on getting home with Hollis and starting their evening routine. Miss Jenny, one of the younger staff members, greeted them with a warm smile. "Hi, Mrs. Whitlock. Hollis had a great nap today." She gestured towards the infant room, where soft classical music played from a small speaker in the corner. Bishop's demeanor changed the moment they crossed the threshold. His ears pricked forward, and his usual relaxed stride became tense. Tessa felt the change through his leash, but before she could process it, he surged forward toward Hollis's crib. "Bishop, wait!" Tessa started, but her words cut short as the large dog planted himself firmly in front of her baby's crib. A low growl rumbled in his chest, something she hadn't heard since his rescue training days with Grant. "Get that dog away from there!" another staff member shouted, rushing forward. But Bishop wouldn't budge. Instead, he began pawing at the crib, his movements growing more insistent with each second. Tessa's heart hammered in her chest. Bishop was a trained medical alert dog. Grant had made sure of that during his recovery. He didn't act this way without reason. "Bishop, show me," she commanded, her voice steady despite her rising fear. The dog's paw moved deliberately to Hollis's chest, then back to Tessa, his amber eyes intense and focused. It was the same signal he'd used to alert Grant about breathing problems after the fire. Pushing past the protesting staff, Tessa reached into the crib. The moment she touched Hollis's cheek, her EMT training kicked in. His skin was cool, and his lips had a subtle bluish tint that made her blood run cold. "Something's wrong," she announced, lifting Hollis from the crib. His breathing was shallow, barely there. "Call 911, now." "Mrs. Whitlock, please." Pamela Voss's voice cut through the growing chaos as the daycare director strode into the room. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her suit wrinkle-free, but her eyes were sharp with concern. Or was it fear? "That dog needs to be removed immediately. He's creating a disturbance." Tessa cradled Hollis to her chest, one hand already pulling out her phone. "My dog just alerted me that my baby isn't breathing properly. I'm calling emergency services." Her fingers shook as she dialed, but her voice remained clear as she spoke to the dispatcher. "This is Tessa Whitlock. I'm at Little Lanterns Daycare. I need immediate medical assistance for my infant son. He's showing signs of respiratory distress." The room erupted into activity. Miss Jenny hovered nearby, wringing her hands, while other staff members tried to hustle the remaining children to another room. Pamela Voss kept insisting that Bishop needed to leave, but the dog remained stationed at Tessa's side, his eyes never leaving Hollis. "Mrs. Whitlock, I must insist." Pamela's voice grew harder. "That animal is frightening the other children." "He stays," Tessa said firmly, her free hand resting on Bishop's head. He's a trained medical alert dog, and he just proved why. She focused on Hollis, monitoring his breathing while they waited for help. Each shallow breath seemed to take too much effort, making her count the seconds until she heard sirens. The paramedics arrived in what felt like hours, but was really only minutes. They burst through the daycare doors with practiced efficiency, equipment in hand. Tessa recognized the lead EMT. She'd worked with him before, in what felt like another lifetime. "Tessa?" Mike Patterson's professional demeanor slipped for just a moment in recognition. "What have we got?" She rattled off Hollis's symptoms with the precision of her former training. "Infant male, 8 months old, showing signs of respiratory depression. Bluish tinge to lips, shallow breathing, cool to touch. No known medical conditions." She paused, then added, "My medical alert dog signaled breathing distress." Mike nodded, already moving to examine Hollis. Bishop watched intently but didn't interfere as the EMT team worked. They quickly set up monitoring equipment, checking vital signs and oxygen levels. "Oxygen saturation is low," Mike announced, already reaching for the pediatric oxygen mask. "We need to transport immediately." "The dog cannot go in the ambulance," his partner stated, eyeing Bishop. "He has to," Tessa insisted, her voice cracking for the first time. "Please, he knew something was wrong before any of us. He was trained for this." Mike looked between Tessa and Bishop, then nodded. "He can ride up front with Jamie. We've worked with service dogs before." He turned to his partner. "The dog stays with us." As they prepared to move Hollis to the ambulance, Pamela Voss appeared again, her composure slightly cracked. "Mrs. Whitlock, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Perhaps he's coming down with something." "My dog doesn't make mistakes about breathing problems," Tessa cut her off, her voice ice cold. "This isn't normal, and you know it." The EMTs worked quickly to secure Hollis on the stretcher, the tiny oxygen mask looking out of place on his small face. Bishop followed closely, his attention never wavering from the baby. Even as they loaded into the ambulance, he maintained his vigilant watch, settling into the front seat only after seeing that Hollis was secured. Tessa sat in the back, holding her baby's small hand, while the EMTs continued their work. The sirens wailed above them as they sped toward the hospital, but all she could focus on was Hollis's chest rising and falling, each breath a reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. Bishop's warning had saved precious minutes, minutes that might have made all the difference. As she watched the medical team work, Tessa couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a random medical emergency. Bishop's reaction had been too specific, too insistent. He'd been trained to recognize respiratory distress, and he'd recognized something in that crib that set off all his alarms. The ambulance raced through the streets, its sirens clearing the way, while Tessa held on to both her son's hand and the growing certainty that something very wrong had happened at Little Lantern's daycare. Bishop's behavior hadn't just revealed a medical emergency. It had uncovered the first thread of what felt like a much larger, darker tapestry. Mike continued monitoring Hollis's vitals, calling out numbers and observations to his partner. Through it all, Tessa could hear Bishop's occasional whine from the front seat. Still alert, still on guard. The same way he'd been when he'd first approached that crib, when he'd first sensed something wasn't right with her baby. The sun was setting now, casting an orange glow through the ambulance's windows. Tessa squeezed Hollis's tiny hand, watching his chest rise and fall with each assisted breath. Whatever was happening, whatever had caused this, she would get to the bottom of it. Bishop had given her the warning she needed, and she wouldn't stop until she understood exactly what had happened to her son at Little Lantern's daycare. The emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos as the medical team wheeled Hollis through the automatic doors. Bishop trotted alongside the gurney, his eyes never leaving the small form of the baby. The German Shepherd's posture remained alert, muscles tense beneath his black and tan coat. "Pediatric respiratory distress," Mike called out to the waiting emergency staff. "Oxygen stats still low despite supplemental oxygen." Dr. Sarah Chen stepped forward, immediately taking charge. "Get him into room 3. She glanced at Bishop, then at Tessa. "Is this a service animal?" "Medical alert." "Dog," Tessa explained quickly, her voice hoarse. "He's the one who detected something was wrong. He's trained for respiratory emergencies." The doctor nodded briskly. "He can stay for now, but he needs to maintain distance from the medical equipment." Bishop seemed to understand, positioning himself in the corner where he could observe everything without being in the way. His amber eyes tracked every movement of the medical team as they transferred Hollis to the hospital bed. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Nurses drew blood while Dr. Chen ordered a battery of tests. Through it all, Bishop remained vigilant, occasionally pawing at the air, his trained signal for detecting breathing problems. "His pressure's dropping again," a nurse called out. Almost simultaneously, Bishop let out a low whine and moved forward, drawing everyone's attention. Dr. Chen glanced between the monitors and the dog. "Interesting timing. Let's start him on additional medication to stabilize his breathing." The medical team worked efficiently, and gradually, Hollis's vital signs began to improve. Tessa stood nearby, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Every beep of the monitor, every small movement of her son's chest felt like a victory and a reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. The relative calm was shattered by the arrival of Pamela Voss, who swept into the emergency room with 2 police officers and an animal control officer in tow. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and tailored suit looked out of place among the medical equipment and harsh fluorescent lighting. "There's the dog that attacked one of our children," Pamela announced, pointing at Bishop. "We need him removed immediately." The animal control officer stepped forward, reaching for his restraint pole, but Tessa moved to stand between him and Bishop. "He didn't attack anyone," she said firmly. "He was alerting to my son's medical distress. He's a trained medical alert dog." "We have multiple staff witnesses who saw the dog acting aggressively near the cribs," Pamela countered. "As director of Little Lanterns, I have a responsibility to report any incident involving potential harm to children." One of the police officers pulled out a notepad. "Ma'am, we need to document this incident. The daycare has filed a formal complaint." Dr. Chen interrupted, her voice sharp with authority. "This dog has been here for the past hour, demonstrating textbook medical alert behavior. In fact, he's been accurately predicting changes in the child's condition before our monitors catch them." But Pamela wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone, showing the officers something on the screen. "We have security footage of the dog's aggressive behavior, and I've already contacted Child Protective Services about Mrs. Whitlock's decision to bring an aggressive animal into a daycare facility." Tessa felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "You did what?" "It's standard procedure," Pamela said smoothly. "When a parent's judgment puts children at risk, we're required to report it." The animal control officer cleared his throat. "We'll need to take the dog in for evaluation. Standard quarantine procedure after an reported incident." "No." Tessa's voice cracked. "Bishop's all I have. He saved my son's life today." Dr. Chen stepped forward again. "The child is still in critical condition. Removing the dog now could compromise our ability to monitor sudden changes in his condition. As the attending physician, I'm requesting the dog be allowed to stay until we've stabilized the patient." The officers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Finally, the senior officer spoke. "We'll hold off on removing the dog for now, but he'll need to be surrendered for evaluation within 24 hours. And ma'am," he turned to Tessa, "you should expect a visit from CPS. They take these reports very seriously." Pamela's perfectly composed face showed just a hint of satisfaction. "We're only thinking of the children's safety, Tessa. I'm sure you understand." After the officers left, Tessa sank into the chair beside Hollis's bed, her hands shaking. Bishop immediately moved to her side, resting his head on her knee. She buried her fingers in his thick fur, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How did everything go so wrong so fast?" Dr. Chen checked Hollis's vital signs again before turning to Tessa. "Your dog's behavior has been invaluable in monitoring your son's condition. I'll document everything I've observed in my medical report." She paused, then added more quietly, "But you should prepare yourself. The system can be overwhelming when it gets set in motion like this." Tessa looked down at Bishop, remembering how her late husband Grant had trained him, how the dog had become their lifeline after Grant's death. Now, in trying to protect her son, Bishop had somehow become a threat in the eyes of the law. The very institutions meant to protect children were now questioning her judgment as a mother. Through the hospital window, she could see the sun had fully set, leaving the world outside dark and uncertain. Bishop shifted closer, his steady presence a reminder of why she trusted him, why she'd always trust him. But for the first time, she realized that trust might come at a terrible cost. The monitors continued their steady beeping, marking each breath her son took. Bishop's head lifted slightly at each sound, still on alert, still protecting. Tessa stroked his fur, wondering how she could choose between the dog who had saved her son's life and the system that now demanded she give him up. In the sterile hospital room, surrounded by machines and uncertainty, Tessa felt more alone than she had since Grant's death. The only comfort was Bishop's warmth against her leg and the sound of Hollis's gradually strengthening breaths. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. Bishop had been right about the danger to her son, and something told her this was only the beginning of a much bigger storm. The quiet of the hospital room was broken by familiar footsteps in the hallway. Tessa looked up to see a tall figure in a worn denim jacket standing in the doorway, and her heart skipped a beat. Wesley Holt's weathered face held the same gentle concern she remembered from years ago, when he and Grant would return from their canine training sessions. Bishop's tail thumped against the floor in recognition, though he didn't move from his protective position beside Hollis's bed. "Heard what happened at Little Lanterns," Wes said softly, stepping into the room. "Thought you might need some backup." Tessa felt tears threatening to spill over. Just seeing him brought back a flood of memories. Grant and Wes working with their dogs in the backyard, the four of them sharing dinner afterward, the way both men's faces would light up talking about their training breakthroughs. "They're saying he attacked Hollis," Tessa managed to say, her voice rough. "But Wes, you should have seen him. He knew something was wrong before any of us did." Wes moved closer to the bed, studying Bishop's positioning and behavior. The big shepherd acknowledged him with a brief glance, but maintained his focus on Hollis. "That's not aggression," Wes said firmly. "Look at his body language. Ears forward, not back. Relaxed tail position. He's monitoring, not threatening." "Try telling that to Animal Control," Tessa replied bitterly. "Or Child Protective Services." Wes's head snapped up. "They called CPS on you?" "The daycare director did. Said bringing Bishop there showed poor judgment." Tessa ran a hand through her hair, fighting exhaustion. "They're coming to take him for evaluation tomorrow." "Like hell they are." Wes pulled up a chair, his expression determined. "This is classic medical alert behavior. Grant trained him for it after that big warehouse fire, remember?" The memory hit Tessa like a physical blow. Grant, recovering from smoke inhalation, teaching Bishop to recognize changes in breathing patterns. The proud smile on his face when Bishop got it right. The way he'd say, "This dog's got a gift, Tess. He's going to save lives someday. She hadn't thought about those training sessions in years. It hurt too much, remembering Grant's patience, his gentle persistence, the way he'd believed in Bishop's capabilities, even when others doubted. "I remember," she whispered. "But I never thought… that was years ago." "Good training sticks," Wes said, "and Grant was the best trainer I ever worked with. Better than half the professionals in the program." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Listen, Tess, I've got 20 years of canine handling experience. I know what dog aggression looks like, and this isn't it. Bishop's doing exactly what he was trained to do, alerting to a medical emergency." Bishop chose that moment to stand up, moving to Hollis's side and pawing gently at the bed rail. Almost immediately, one of the monitors began beeping more rapidly. A nurse hurried in, checked the readings, and adjusted something on Hollis's IV. "Blood pressure's a little high," she explained. "We're correcting it now." She glanced at Bishop with newfound respect. "That's the third time he's alerted us before the monitors caught a change." After she left, Wes gave Tessa a pointed look. "See? That's not random behavior. That's specific response to a medical condition. Exactly what Grant trained him for." Tessa watched as Bishop settled back into his monitoring position. "But how do we prove that? The daycare has video of him blocking access to Hollis, growling at staff. It looks bad." "Then we'll get experts to review the footage," Wes said firmly. "I still have connections in the K9 training community. We can get professional assessments of his body language, document his alert patterns here at the hospital." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're not in this alone, Tess." The simple touch of his hand on hers brought another wave of memories. Wes at Grant's funeral, steady and solid beside her, bringing her meals in those first awful weeks, helping her walk Bishop when she could barely get out of bed. He'd gradually drifted away as she'd withdrawn into her grief. But now here he was again, ready to fight for her. "I can't lose him, Wes," she said softly, looking at Bishop. "After Grant, Bishop's been my anchor. He's the reason I could keep going, keep being a mother to Hollis. And now they're saying I'm negligent for trusting him? We won't let that happen." Wes's voice held absolute conviction. "Grant knew what he was doing when he trained Bishop. That dog's got more medical alert training than some service animals I've worked with. We just need to prove it." He pulled out his phone, starting to scroll through contacts. "I know a veterinary behaviorist who specializes in working dogs, and my old supervisor from the K9 unit. He's an expert witness in dog behavior cases now. Between them and Dr. Chen's documentation of Bishop's alerts here," Tessa watched him making calls, organizing resources, building a defense for Bishop with the same quiet efficiency she remembered from his handling days. The knot of fear in her chest began to loosen slightly. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked when he paused between calls. Wes looked up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because Grant would never forgive me if I let them take his dog. Because Bishop's a hero, not a threat. And because…" He hesitated, then finished softly. "Because you and Hollis matter to me. Always have." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Tessa felt tears threatening again, and quickly looked away, focusing on Bishop's steady presence beside the bed. She couldn't deal with the emotions Wes's presence stirred up. Not now, not with everything else happening. "Thank you," she managed to say, "for believing in Bishop, for helping us." "Always," Wes replied simply, and turned back to his phone calls, giving her space to compose herself. Tessa stroked Bishop's fur, watching Hollis's peaceful sleep, and tried not to think about how natural it felt having Wes back in her life. Right now, she needed to focus on protecting her son and saving Bishop. Everything else, including the way her heart jumped when Wes smiled or the memories his presence stirred, would have to wait. Dr. Lyle Fenwick stood at the foot of Hollis's hospital bed, frowning at the clipboard in his hands. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the window, making his tall figure seem even more imposing in his white coat. He adjusted his glasses and looked up at Tessa, who sat beside the bed with Bishop at her feet. "These blood work results are concerning," he said carefully, tapping his pen against the paper. "We found traces of a sedative that isn't part of any treatment we've administered." Tessa's hand froze where she'd been stroking Bishop's fur. "What kind of sedative?" "A relatively common one, but powerful, especially for an infant." Dr. Fenwick moved closer, lowering his voice. "Mrs. Whitlock, I need to ask, has Hollis been given any medication outside of what was prescribed?" "No," Tessa said firmly. "Absolutely not. The only medicine he's had is the antibiotic you prescribed for his ear infection last month." Dr. Fenwick nodded, making a note. "I treated your husband, Grant, during his recovery," he said quietly. "I remember Bishop's training. These alert behaviors you described at the daycare, they're consistent with what I observed when he was learning to detect Grant's respiratory distress." Bishop's ears perked up at the mention of Grant's name. He stood and moved to Hollis's bedside, placing his paw carefully on the rail, his standard alert position. "See that?" Dr. Fenwick pointed. "That's a trained response, not aggression." He checked Hollis's vital signs. And sure enough, there's a slight drop in his oxygen levels. Nothing dangerous, but Bishop caught it before our monitors did. Before Tessa could respond, raised voices in the hallway drew their attention. Pamela Voss's perfectly modulated tones carried clearly through the door. "I have every right to check on the child's condition," she was saying. "As daycare director, I'm responsible for documenting this unfortunate incident. That dog should never have been allowed near the premises." Wes, who had been standing quietly by the window, moved to the doorway. His broad shoulders filled the frame as Pamela appeared, flanked by 2 members of her daycare staff. "This is a restricted area," he said firmly. "Family only." Pamela's professionally pleasant expression tightened. "I'm simply doing my due diligence. We have security footage showing that animal acting aggressively." "You mean the footage showing a trained medical alert dog performing exactly as he was supposed to?" Wes countered. "Because that's what the canine training experts will see when they review it." Dr. Fenwick stepped forward. "Ms. Voss, I'm Dr. Fenwick, Hollis's pediatrician. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave. We're in the middle of reviewing some concerning test results." Pamela's eyes narrowed slightly. "Concerning how?" "That's confidential medical information," Dr. Fenwick replied. "But I will be documenting everything thoroughly for the investigation." Something flickered across Pamela's face. So quickly, Tessa almost missed it. Fear? Anger? But her professional mask slipped back into place immediately. "Of course," she said smoothly. "I'll check back another time. But I do want to remind everyone that there will be consequences for bringing a dangerous animal into a childcare facility." After she left, Tessa let out a shaky breath. "She's really going to try to have Bishop declared dangerous, isn't she?" "Let her try," Wes said grimly. He turned to Dr. Fenwick. "Doc, about those test results, could the sedative you found have caused Hollis's breathing problems?" "Absolutely," Dr. Fenwick replied. "In fact, respiratory depression is a common side effect of this particular medication, especially in infants. The dose we found was low, but for a baby Hollis's size." He shook his head. "If Bishop hadn't alerted when he did." Tessa felt cold despite the warm hospital room. "Are you saying someone deliberately gave my baby sedatives?" "I'm saying we need to investigate how this substance got into his system," Dr. Fenwick said carefully. "I'm required to report suspicious circumstances like this, especially involving a child." Wes was already pulling out his phone. "I've got a contact in the police department, someone who'll take this seriously. We should document everything while it's fresh." Bishop whined softly and pressed against Tessa's legs. She buried her fingers in his thick fur, drawing strength from his solid presence. "The timing of Pamela's visit is interesting," Dr. Fenwick mused, making more notes on his clipboard. "Very interested in those test results. And very invested in discrediting Bishop," Wes added. He looked at Tessa. "A trained medical alert dog would be a serious threat to anyone trying to hide medical tampering." Tessa's mind was spinning. But why? Why would anyone at the daycare? She couldn't even finish the thought. "That's what we need to find out," Wes said. He pulled up a chair next to Tessa. "Tell me everything you remember about Bishop's behavior at pickup times. Any patterns? Other kids he seemed concerned about?" Tessa closed her eyes, thinking back. "He was always restless when we'd go to pick up Hollis. I thought he was just excited to see him, but..." She opened her eyes. "Last week, he kept trying to pull me toward the infant room even after I had Hollis, like he wanted to check on the other babies." Dr. Fenwick looked up sharply. "I should review admissions records, see if we've had any other cases of unexplained respiratory issues from Little Lanterns." "Document everything," Wes emphasized. "Times, dates, Bishop's specific behaviors. The more evidence we gather, the harder it'll be for them to spin this as a dog attack." Bishop's head suddenly lifted, and he moved back to Hollis's bedside with purpose. The monitors showed another slight dip in oxygen levels, small, but caught by Bishop before the alarms could sound. "Good boy," Tessa whispered, watching as a nurse adjusted Hollis's oxygen. Every alert reinforced what she'd known in her heart. Bishop wasn't a threat. He was doing exactly what Grant had trained him to do: protecting life. Dr. Fenwick finished his notes and tucked the clipboard under his arm. "I'm ordering a full toxicology panel," he said. "And I'll contact some colleagues, see if there's a pattern we're missing. Whatever's going on here, Bishop may have uncovered something bigger than one incident." After he left, Tessa slumped in her chair, exhausted. Wes's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. "We're going to figure this out," he promised. "Bishop's not the problem. He's the solution. And now we know what he was trying to tell us." Tessa looked at her son's peaceful face, then at the loyal dog who had saved him. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture that was both terrifying and infuriating. Someone had put her baby at risk, and then tried to blame the very creature who'd saved him. "Bishop knew," she said softly. "He knew something was wrong, and he didn't back down even when everyone was against him." She straightened in her chair, feeling a familiar determination rise up, the same strength that had gotten her through losing Grant. "Well, neither will I." Wes's phone buzzed with a response from his police contact. "They're sending someone from Special Victims to take statements," he reported, "and I've got 3 K9 experts lined up to review that security footage." Bishop settled into his guard position, eyes fixed on Hollis, ever vigilant. Whatever was happening at Little Lanterns, he had exposed the first thread. Now they just had to keep pulling until the whole truth unraveled. Wes leaned forward in his chair, his eyes distant with memory. The steady beep of Hollis's monitors filled the quiet hospital room as evening settled in. Bishop remained alert at his post, his amber eyes never leaving the baby's crib. "You know," Wes said softly, "I remember when Grant first started training Bishop. It was during his recovery, after that bad fire at the warehouse district." Tessa's breath caught at the mention of her late husband's name. The memories were still raw, but something in Wes's tone made her listen. "Grant was so frustrated being stuck at home," Wes continued. "The smoke inhalation had really done a number on his lungs. But instead of just lying around, he turned it into something positive, started working with Bishop." "I remember," Tessa said quietly. "He'd spend hours with Bishop in the backyard, I thought it was just to keep himself busy." Wes shook his head. It was more than that. Grant knew he needed help monitoring his breathing. You know how stubborn he was about admitting when things got bad. So he trained Bishop to alert to pressure changes, irregular breathing patterns. That dog became better than any medical monitor. Tessa sat up straighter, her eyes widening as the pieces clicked into place. The pawing at the chest, that's exactly what Bishop used to do with Grant when his oxygen levels dropped. Exactly. Wes leaned over to scratch behind Bishop's ears. Grant taught him to recognize the signs and signal them clearly. Bishop's not just any rescue dog. He's a trained medical alert dog. Those instincts don't go away. Tears welled in Tessa's eyes as she watched Bishop. All this time, he'd been using the very skills Grant had taught him to protect their son. The same alerting behavior that had helped her husband was now being used to save their child. When Grant... Tessa's voice wavered. When he passed, Bishop seemed lost for months, but when Hollis was born, it was like he found his purpose again. She wiped her eyes. He wasn't attacking at the daycare. He was doing exactly what Grant trained him to do, warning us about dangerous breathing problems. Wes nodded. And doing it perfectly, from what I can tell. The timing of his alerts matches exactly with Hollis's oxygen drops. That's not aggression. That's specialized training in action. Bishop's head lifted at the sound of his name, and he gave a soft whine before returning his attention to Hollis. The baby slept peacefully now, his color much better than it had been at the daycare. "We need to document all of this," Tessa said, determination replacing her grief. "Grant's training records, Bishop's certification process, there must be paperwork somewhere." "Already on it," Wes replied. "I called some of our old K9 unit colleagues. They remember Grant working with Bishop. We can get statements about the training process, prove this was established behavior." Tessa stood and paced the small room, energy coursing through her. "All this time, I've been defensive about Bishop, trying to prove he's not dangerous. But we need to flip the narrative. He's not just not dangerous, he's a hero. He did exactly what he was supposed to do, exactly what Grant trained him for." "And that's what makes Pamela's story fall apart," Wes added. "A trained medical alert dog doesn't suddenly become aggressive. If anything, Bishop's behavior proves something was seriously wrong with Hollis's breathing. Wrong enough to trigger those alert responses." Tessa stopped at the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Grant always said Bishop was special, that he had an instinct for helping people that went beyond just training. She turned back to face Wes. What if that's why he was so persistent at the daycare? What if he sensed something wrong with other children, too? Wes pulled out his notebook. "Let's start from the beginning. Tell me every time Bishop seemed unusually focused on the daycare, any behavior that seemed odd at the time, but makes sense now." For the next hour, they built a timeline. Bishop's increasing agitation during pickup times, his attempts to enter other rooms, the way he'd plant himself by certain cribs during the brief times he'd been inside. What they'd dismissed as anxiety or overprotectiveness now looked like a pattern of alerts. "We need to get his training records from the fire department," Wes said, flipping through his notes. "Grant would have documented everything. That was just how he was. Those records will show Bishop's not just some random rescue dog. He's a specially trained medical alert animal using those exact skills to protect Hollis." Bishop suddenly stood, his posture alert but calm. Moments later, Hollis's oxygen monitor showed a slight dip, not enough to trigger alarms, but enough that the dog had noticed. They watched as he padded to the crib, gently pawing at the side until a nurse came to check. "See that?" Wes said quietly. "Calm, controlled, precise. That's trained behavior, not aggression. Anyone who knows anything about working dogs will see the difference." Tessa felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't from sadness. "Grant knew," she whispered. "Somehow he knew we'd need Bishop like this. That's why he spent all those hours training him, even when he was supposed to be resting." "Grant always played the long game," Wes agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "He believed in being prepared, in building something that would last." He reached over to squeeze Tessa's hand. "Bishop isn't just protecting Hollis, he's carrying on Grant's legacy of saving lives." The revelation hit Tessa like a physical force. All this time, she'd been seeing Bishop's actions through a lens of fear. Fear of losing him, fear of being judged, fear of failing as a mother. But now she saw the truth. Bishop wasn't a liability to defend. He was a highly trained medical alert dog doing exactly what he was supposed to do. Her grief, which had been a heavy weight since Grant's death, began to transform into something else. Determination. Determination to honor Grant's foresight by protecting both Bishop and Hollis. Determination to uncover whatever was happening at Little Lanterns that had put her son in danger. "We're going to prove what really happened," she said firmly. "Not just clear Bishop's name, but figure out why he needed to alert in the first place. Someone at that daycare has answers, and we're going to find them." Bishop looked up at her words, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand. He'd done his part, alerting to danger, protecting his charge, staying steady despite the accusations. Now, it was their turn to do theirs. Tessa's hands shook slightly as she filled out the official complaint form against Little Lanterns Daycare. Each box required careful attention: dates, times, witnesses, detailed descriptions of events. She documented everything: Bishop's alert behavior, Hollis's medical crisis, the sedatives found in his system, and the subsequent attempts to blame her dog rather than investigate the true cause. "Are you sure about this?" Wes asked, watching from across her kitchen table. "Once you file this, Pamela Voss won't take it lying down." "I have to," Tessa replied, her voice firm despite her trembling fingers. "What if it's not just Hollis? What if other children are at risk?" The county inspector's office was housed in a bland government building downtown. Tessa approached the front desk, complaint folder clutched to her chest. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman with graying hair, barely glanced up as she took the paperwork. "Someone will contact you within 48 hours to confirm receipt," she droned, already turning back to her computer. Those 48 hours felt like weeks. Tessa jumped every time her phone rang, hoping for news. When the call finally came, it was to inform her that inspectors would visit Little Lanterns the following morning. "You can attend as the complainant," the official told her, "but you must remain silent during the inspection unless directly addressed." Tessa arrived early, parking across the street to watch. 2 county vehicles pulled up precisely at 9 o'clock. But her heart sank when she saw Pamela Voss greeting them at the entrance, perfectly coiffed and radiating charm. "Welcome, welcome," Pamela's voice carried across the parking lot. "We're so pleased to have you here. We pride ourselves on maintaining the highest standards." Tessa followed them inside, trying to stay inconspicuous. Pamela led the tour with practiced ease, highlighting safety features and cleanliness protocols. Every room was spotless, every staff member poised and professional. "Our medication protocols are especially stringent," Pamela explained, showing them a locked cabinet with a digital keypad. "Only authorized personnel can access any medications, and everything is meticulously logged." One inspector nodded approvingly. "Very impressive system." "And here are our daily activity logs," Pamela continued, producing pristine binders. "Every child's schedule, meals, and medications are tracked in real time." Tessa wanted to scream. The logs she'd seen while Hollis attended had been much messier, often incomplete. These were clearly prepared for the inspection. When they reached the infant room where Bishop had alerted, Pamela's voice took on a concerned tone. "This is where that unfortunate incident occurred. We've since implemented additional security measures to prevent unauthorized animals from entering the premises." The dog in question was actually a trained medical alert animal, Tessa couldn't help interjecting. The lead inspector turned to her with a frown. "Ma'am, please remember the guidelines about speaking during the inspection." Pamela gave Tessa a sympathetic look that didn't reach her eyes. "We understand this has been difficult for you. Perhaps it would be better if you waited outside." The inspection continued for another hour. Tessa watched helplessly as Pamela smoothly addressed every question, providing documentation that seemed to counter each of her complaints. By the end, the inspectors were thanking Pamela for her time and cooperation. "We'll file our report, but I don't see any causes for concern," the lead inspector said. "Your facility appears to be exceeding requirements in most areas." Tessa followed them out, desperate to make them understand. "Please, there's more to investigate. The medical report's showing sedatives." "Ma'am," the inspector cut her off firmly. "Our inspection found no evidence supporting your allegations. If you have medical concerns, take them up with your doctor. Good day." She stood in the parking lot, watching them drive away. Pamela appeared beside her, close enough to speak privately. "You really should have let this go, Tessa," she said softly. "Now you've forced my hand." That evening, Tessa's phone began buzzing with messages from other parents at Little Lanterns. Someone had posted in the daycare's private Facebook group about her unfounded accusations and disturbing obsession with bringing her dangerous dog to the facility. The post, written by an anonymous parent but clearly orchestrated by Pamela, painted a picture of an unstable single mother who couldn't accept that her pet had behaved aggressively. It suggested she was projecting her grief over her husband's death onto innocent caregivers. "Did you see what they're saying?" Tessa's voice shook as she called Wes. "They're making me sound crazy." "I'm looking at it now," he replied grimly. "This is calculated character assassination. Pamela's trying to discredit you before you can gather more evidence." More posts appeared throughout the evening. Concerned parents sharing warning signs they'd noticed about Tessa's behavior. Sympathetic messages about how sad it was to see someone struggling with reality. Each comment carefully crafted to seem caring while undermining her credibility. Tessa's phone rang again, the director of the library where she worked part-time. "Is everything all right?" her boss asked cautiously. "We've received some concerning calls about you." "What kind of calls?" "Several parents expressing worry about having someone unstable working around children. Tessa, you know we support you, but if this affects the library's reputation..." Tessa sank onto her couch, realization dawning. Pamela wasn't just defending herself, she was systematically destroying Tessa's life. Her political connections and years of community influence were being wielded like a weapon. Bishop padded over, resting, his head on her knee. She scratched behind his ears, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "What do we do now?" she whispered. Her phone lit up with another message, this time from a blocked number. "Consider this a friendly warning. Drop the complaints or things will get much worse." Tessa took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. She'd known going against Little Lanterns wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't imagined this level of orchestrated attack. Pamela wasn't just a daycare director protecting her business. She was someone with real power and the willingness to use it destructively. Looking at Bishop, she remembered how he'd stood his ground despite the chaos around him, focused only on protecting Hollis. She needed to do the same, stay focused on the truth, no matter how many people tried to twist it. She called Wes back. "I need you to help me document everything that's happening every post, every call, every threat. Pamela thinks she can bury the truth under lies and intimidation. But if she's working this hard to discredit me, then there's definitely something bigger she's hiding, Wes finished. Don't worry, Tessa. We'll figure this out. The truth has a way of coming out, no matter how hard people try to cover it up. Tessa looked at the growing stream of hostile messages on her phone. She'd gone up against Little Lanterns expecting a straightforward investigation. Instead, she'd stumbled into something much darker, a web of influence and corruption that went far beyond a single daycare center. But she thought of Hollis, of Bishop's desperate attempts to alert them to danger, of other children who might be at risk. Running away wasn't an option. Sometimes standing up for what's right meant standing alone, at least for a while. She began taking screenshots of every message, every post, every piece of evidence showing how Pamela operated. The truth would come out eventually. She just had to stay strong enough to keep fighting until it did. The text message came at 2:15 in the morning. Need to talk. About your son. Not safe to call. Tessa stared at her phone screen, heart pounding. The number wasn't saved in her contacts. After Pamela's smear campaign, she'd grown wary of anonymous messages. But something about this one felt different. Who is this? She typed back. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally. Rini from Little Lanterns, please, I can't sleep anymore keeping this secret. Tessa sat up in bed, fully awake now. She remembered Rini, a quiet young woman who often worked in the infant room. She'd always seemed kind, if a bit nervous. What secret? Tessa asked. Not over text. Can we meet? Somewhere public but quiet? Tessa thought for a moment. The coffee shop at Marshall's Books. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock? Okay, please come alone. And please don't tell anyone. Tessa immediately called Wes. Despite the hour, he answered on the second ring. I need you to be my backup tomorrow, she explained, describing the messages. I don't think it's a trap, but after everything Pamela's done, I'll be there, he promised. I'll sit at another table, keep watch. The next morning, Tessa arrived early and chose a corner table with a clear view of both exits. Wes was already there, pretending to read a newspaper while nursing a coffee. At exactly 10 o'clock, Rini walked in. She looked even more anxious than usual, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy day. She kept glancing over her shoulder as she made her way to Tessa's table. Thank you for coming, Rini whispered, sliding into the chair. Her hands shook as she set down her purse. I'm sorry about the secrecy. I can't live with myself anymore. What's going on, Rini? Tessa kept her voice gentle, recognizing the signs of someone terrified but desperate to talk. It's the nap drops, Rini said, her voice barely audible. That's what Pamela calls them. She keeps them in her office in a locked drawer. They're some kind of sedative. I don't know exactly what. But she makes us put them in the bottles of babies who won't sleep. Tessa felt her blood run cold. That's what happened to Hollis? Rini nodded, tears welling up. Usually it's just a few drops, enough to make them drowsy. But that day, I saw her add extra to Hollis's bottle. She said he'd been especially fussy, that you seemed stressed and needed him to have a good long nap. She wiped her eyes. When your dog started acting strange, I knew something was wrong, but I was too scared to say anything. How long has this been happening? Years, I think. It's just expected. When a baby won't settle, Pamela gives us the drops. She says it's harmless, just herbal supplements. But I've seen the bottles. They don't have labels. And sometimes the babies sleep so deeply. Rini's voice cracked. Tessa reached across the table, squeezing Rini's trembling hands. Why are you telling me this now? Because I can't sleep anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see your baby's blue lips, And now Pamela's trying to destroy you for figuring it out. Rini took a shaky breath. But I'm so scared. She knows everything about me. Where I live, my family. She's friends with my landlord, the bank manager who approved my car loan. She could ruin my life. We won't let that happen, Tessa promised. We can protect you. How? Rini asked desperately. Wes chose that moment to approach their table, moving slowly to avoid startling Rini. Because we'll do this the right way, he said quietly, sitting down. I have contacts in law enforcement who can help. We can get you proper whistleblower protection. Rini stared at him, then back at Tessa. You weren't alone? I needed backup, Tessa explained. This is Wes. He's helping me investigate what happened to Hollis. He used to be a police K-9 handler. He knows how to handle sensitive situations. And how to protect people, Wes added. What you're doing is brave, Rini, but you don't have to do it alone. Rini seemed to deflate slightly, as if sharing her burden had physically lightened her. I want to help, but I don't know how to prove anything. The drops are locked up. Pamela's the only one with a key. Start by documenting everything you can, Wes advised. Dates, times, which children received the drops. Take photos if you can do it safely, but don't take unnecessary risks. Pamela can't know you're gathering evidence. I have some things already, Rini admitted. I started keeping notes after what happened to Hollis. Times when Pamela made us use the drops, which babies slept too long afterward. And She hesitated, then reached into her purse. I managed to save one of the empty bottles before it went in the trash. She pulled out a small glass vial wrapped in tissue paper. It was unmarked except for a handwritten X on the bottom. This is exactly what we need, Wes said, carefully wrapping the vial back up. I can have it tested discreetly. What do you need me to do now? Rini asked. Keep going to work normally, Tessa said. Act like nothing's changed, but stay in touch with us. If anything makes you feel unsafe, call immediately. We'll set up a secure way to communicate, Wes added, and I'll start working on official protection for you, but it might take a little time to build a strong enough case. Rini nodded, still clearly scared but looking more resolved. I should go. I can't be late for my shift or Pamela will get suspicious. Wait, Tessa said as Rini stood up. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth. I'm not brave, Rini whispered. I'm terrified. But seeing what she's doing to you, knowing what she did to Hollis and other babies, being scared feels better than being guilty. After Rini left, Tessa and Wes sat in heavy silence. It's worse than we thought, Tessa finally said. She's not just covering up one accident. She's been deliberately drugging babies. And she's got enough power to keep people quiet about it, Wes added grimly. No wonder she came after you so hard when Bishop exposed what happened to Hollis. What do we do now? We build the case carefully. Test that vial. Document everything Rini tells us. Look for other witnesses who might come forward. And we keep Rini safe. She's taking an enormous risk. Tessa thought about all the parents who'd turned against her, believing Pamela's lies. About other babies who might be getting those quiet nap drops right now. About Rini going back to work carrying such a heavy secret. We have to stop her, Tessa said firmly, no matter what it takes. We will, Wes promised. The truth's coming out, Tessa. Pamela just doesn't know it yet. The manila envelope landed on Tessa's kitchen table with a soft thud. Wes stood beside her, his expression grim as she opened it. My contact in the licensing department came through, he said quietly. You might want to sit down for this. Tessa pulled out a stack of documents, her hands trembling slightly. The first page was a business registration for Little Lanterns Daycare. Her eyes scanned down to the ownership details, and she felt her stomach drop. Silent partner, Ira Mullen? She looked up at Wes. The city councilman? The same one who chairs the Public Safety Committee, Wes confirmed, pulling out a chair and sitting beside her. And who, coincidentally, oversees all daycare licensing and inspections in the county. Tessa spread more papers across the table: inspection reports, licensing documents, safety certifications. All of them bore Mullen's signature or his department's stamp of approval. These dates, some of these inspections are marked as completed before the facilities even existed. He's been fast-tracking everything for Pamela, Wes explained. Rubber stamping permits, bypassing safety checks, pushing through licenses for new locations before proper inspections, and getting a nice cut of the profits in return. Tessa's hands clenched into fists. So when Pamela kept walking away clean, it wasn't just her connections. It was official protection from inside the system. Wes pulled out more documents. Look at these profit statements. Every time a new Little Lanterns location opens, a shell company owned by Mullen receives a substantial consulting fee. How many locations are we talking about? 12 in the last 3 years, all fast-tracked, all operating under the same practices we found at Hollis's daycare. Wes's voice was heavy with disgust. The sedatives, the covered-up incidents, the falsified safety records, it's not just one bad operator, Tessa. It's a whole corrupt system they've built together. Tessa stood up abruptly, needing to move. She paced her small kitchen, trying to process the scope of what they'd uncovered. All those babies, she whispered. All those parents who trust them. And anyone who might expose it gets crushed, Wes added, like what they tried to do to you and Bishop. Tessa stopped at her window, looking out at her backyard where Bishop lay in the sunshine, her loyal protector, who they'd tried to paint as dangerous because he'd exposed their crimes. We have to stop them, she said firmly. All of them. It won't be easy, Wes warned. Mullen has serious political power. He's been on the council for 15 years, has connections all through city government. I don't care how powerful he is. Tessa turned back to face Wes. They're hurting children, using their positions to profit from putting babies at risk. How many other families could go through what Hollis and I did? Wes nodded slowly. You're right. But we need to be smart about this. Mullen won't go down without a fight, and he has resources we can't match. What about your police contacts? Some will help, others... Wes grimaced. Let's just say Mullen's influence reaches into the department, too. We need to build an airtight case before we move against him. Tessa returned to the table, sorting through the documents with new purpose. Reenie's evidence about the sedatives, these licensing documents, the profit statements. She looked up at Wes. Could we take this to the media? It's risky. Mullen has friends at the local papers. But... Wes pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. I know someone at the State Herald. She's done investigative pieces on political corruption before. Might be willing to look into this. Would it be safe for Reenie? We'll protect her identity, and having the story public might actually help keep her safer, harder for them to retaliate if people are watching. Tessa nodded slowly, then gathered the documents into careful piles. I kept thinking this was just about clearing Bishop's name, protecting Hollis, but it's so much bigger than that now. Are you sure you want to take this on? Wes asked quietly. Going after someone like Mullen, it could get ugly. Tessa thought of all the parents dropping their children off at Little Lanterns locations across the county, all of them believing their babies were safe, just like she had. All of them at the mercy of Pamela's greed and Mullen's corruption. I have to, she said firmly. What kind of mother would I be if I knew about this and did nothing? What kind of person would I be? Wes reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Then we'll do it together. Smart and careful, but we'll do it. They spent the next few hours organizing their evidence, making copies, planning their next moves. As the afternoon light faded, Tessa felt the weight of what they were undertaking settle onto her shoulders. This wasn't just her personal fight anymore. It had become something much larger, a battle against entrenched corruption that put countless children at risk. "We should warn Renee," she said suddenly. "If we're going to expose Mullen's involvement, she needs to be prepared for the fallout." "I'll set up a secure meeting," Wes agreed, "and I'll start reaching out to my contact at the State Herald. The more eyes we have on this, the safer everyone will be." Tessa walked him to the door, Bishop padding along beside them. As Wes stepped onto her porch, he turned back. "You know," he said softly, "Grant would be proud of you. Taking on this fight, standing up for what's right no matter the cost." Tessa felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I learned that from him, from both of you, really. We'll bring them down, Tessa. Pamela, Mullen, all of them. The truth has a way of coming out, especially when good people refuse to stay quiet." As she watched him drive away, Tessa felt a strange mix of fear and determination settle in her chest. The battle ahead would be harder than anything she'd imagined when this began. But she wasn't facing it alone. And she wasn't fighting just for herself anymore. She was fighting for every parent and child caught in Pamela and Mullen's web of corruption. Bishop pressed against her leg, and she reached down to scratch his ears. "We're doing the right thing, aren't we, boy?" His tail wagged as he looked up at her with complete trust. The same trust he'd shown when he refused to leave Hollis's side, when he'd known something was wrong, and refused to back down despite the consequences. Sometimes, Tessa realized, the biggest acts of courage started with simply refusing to look away from wrong being done. Everything else, the investigation, the evidence, the confrontation with power, grew from that one crucial choice to stand firm in the face of injustice. She gave Bishop a final pat and went back inside to review their evidence again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new risks as they moved against Mullen's power. But tonight, she would prepare. Tonight she would make sure their case was strong enough to bring down not just one corrupt daycare director, but an entire system built on profiting from children's safety. The truth would come out. And when it did, no amount of political power would be able to keep it hidden any longer. Renee Calhoun's hands trembled as she clutched her paper coffee cup in Dr. Fenwick's office. The early morning sun cast long shadows through the Venetian blinds, striping the worn carpet with bars of light. Bishop lay at Tessa's feet, his amber eyes fixed on the nervous daycare assistant. "I can't go back there," Renee whispered. "Once I do this, once I talk, Pamela will know it was me." Dr. Fenwick leaned forward in his chair, his kind eyes serious behind his glasses. "You'll have full medical documentation supporting your testimony. The sedative levels I found in Hollis weren't imaginary. They were real, and they were dangerous." Tessa watched as Renee struggled with her decision. The younger woman looked smaller somehow, drowning in her oversized sweater, but there was a spark of determination growing in her eyes. "How many other babies?" Renee asked suddenly. "How many other Hollises are there? I keep thinking about that." "Too many," Tessa said softly. "And there will be more if we don't stop this." Dr. Fenwick pulled out a thick folder. "I've been reviewing admission records. The pattern of unexplained drowsiness goes back months, but without someone willing to come forward, to confirm what was happening inside Little Lanterns, I'll do it." Renee's voice shook, but her chin lifted. "I'll testify about the drops, about Pamela's instructions to keep quiet, all of it." The relief Tessa felt lasted exactly 3 hours and 27 minutes. That's when her phone rang. Wes's voice was tight with urgency. "They've moved up Bishop's hearing. Pamela's pushing for immediate action based on ongoing danger to children. They're scheduling it for tomorrow morning." Tessa's knees gave out. She sank onto her couch, one hand finding Bishop's fur. "Tomorrow? That's not possible. We need more time." "It gets worse," Wes continued. "I just heard from your lawyer. CPS is filing for emergency removal of Hollis. Pamela's given them a statement claiming you're emotionally unstable, that keeping a dangerous animal in the home shows impaired judgment." The room spun. Tessa could hear her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Bishop whined softly, pressing his nose against her hand. "I can't lose them both," she whispered. "Wes, I can't." "Listen to me." His voice was steel and comfort all at once. "I'm calling in every favor I have with the K-9 unit. Jerry at the shelter owes me from when I helped place those retired police dogs. We can delay the hearing, maybe get a few days. But Tessa?" He paused. "We need to move fast." She looked around her living room, at Hollis's toys scattered across the floor, at Bishop's bed in the corner, at the life she'd built from the ashes of losing Grant. It felt like it was all slipping through her fingers. A knock at the door made her jump. Dr. Fenwick stood on her porch, his usually neat appearance slightly disheveled. "I came as soon as I heard," he said, stepping inside. "I've already drafted my medical testimony about Bishop's behavior. It wasn't aggression. It was a trained medical alert response. We can prove that." "Will it be enough?" Tessa asked. "Combined with Reenie's testimony about the sedatives? It has to be." He ran a hand through his gray hair. "I've also documented every suspicious case I've seen from Little Lanterns. Every infant with unexplained lethargy. Every parent who mentioned concerns only to have them dismissed." Wes arrived 20 minutes later, his truck kicking up dust in the driveway. He carried a stack of files under one arm. "Jerry's going to testify about Bishop's temperament evaluation. Perfect scores across the board. And I've got 3 other K-9 handlers willing to review the daycare security footage. They'll confirm his body language showed 0 aggression." They spread everything across Tessa's kitchen table. Medical records, training certificates, witness statements. A paper trail of truth fighting against Pamela's web of lies. But would it be enough? And would it come together in time? "The CPS hearing is scheduled for Friday," Tessa said numbly. 3 days from now. They could take Hollis then." "We won't let that happen." Wes's hand found hers under the table, warm and steady. "We've got proof of institutional negligence at Little Lanterns. Once that comes out, CPS will be investigating them, not you." Bishop padded over to Hollis's playpen, where the baby was watching them with wide eyes. The massive dog settled beside it, his usual guard position. Looking at them, Tessa felt her throat tighten. They were her whole world, her son and the dog who'd saved him. The thought of losing either was unbearable. "I should have seen it sooner," she whispered. "All those times Hollis came home groggy from daycare. I'm his mother. I should have known." "Stop." Dr. Fenwick's voice was gentle but firm. "Pamela Voss built her business on fooling parents, on making them trust her while she betrayed that trust. You're not the one who failed here." The afternoon stretched into evening as they built their case. Wes made calls, pulling in more support from his old K-9 unit contacts. Dr. Fenwick documented everything, creating a timeline of suspicious incidents at Little Lanterns. And through it all, Bishop kept his quiet vigil over Hollis, as if he understood everything at stake. "Jerry can only hold off the hearing until Monday," Wes said finally, rubbing his tired eyes. "That gives us 5 days to pull everything together." 5 days to save my family?" Tessa murmured. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest. The fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that one wrong move could cost her everything. She thought of Reenie, risking her job and safety to tell the truth. Of Dr. Fenwick, putting his professional reputation on the line. Of Wes, calling in every favor he had. She wasn't alone in this fight. But she was the one with the most to lose. That night, after everyone had gone and Hollis was asleep, Tessa sat on the floor beside Bishop. His head rested in her lap, his steady presence anchoring her as it had so many times before. "You knew," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "You knew something was wrong, and you wouldn't back down, no matter what it cost you." She pressed her face into his fur, breathing in the familiar scent. "I won't back down either, I promise." The next few days would determine everything: Bishop's fate, Hollis's future, the exposure of Pamela's crimes. Tessa felt the weight of it all pressing down, threatening to crush her. But she also felt something else, something growing stronger with each passing hour. Determination. They had the truth on their side. They had evidence. They had witnesses willing to speak up. Now they just needed time, and the courage to see it through. Bishop's tail thumped softly against the floor, his eyes never leaving her face. In them she saw the same unwavering loyalty that had made him stand his ground that day at the daycare. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning sky darkened to an ominous gray as the first snowflakes began to fall. Tessa stood at her kitchen window, watching the weather deteriorate with unsettling speed. Weather alerts kept buzzing on her phone. Severe winter storm warning, expected accumulation of 12 to 18 inches, dangerous wind conditions. She'd already canceled Hollis's daycare drop-off, unwilling to risk the roads. But something gnawed at her stomach, an unshakable feeling that she needed to check on Little Lanterns. The thought of other people's children there, under Pamela's care during a major storm, made her skin crawl. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Hollis whimpered from his playpen, and Bishop pressed close against her leg, offering silent comfort. "It's okay, baby," she called softly. "The emergency lights will come on soon." But they didn't. The house grew darker as the snow fell harder, transforming the morning into an eerie twilight. Her phone rang, Wes's name lighting up the screen. "Are you watching this?" he asked without preamble. "The whole city's going dark. Power substations are freezing." "I need to go to Little Lanterns," Tessa blurted out. The words surprised her, but the certainty behind them didn't. "What?" "Tessa, the roads are getting dangerous. I know how Pamela operates. She'll do anything to keep that place running, to keep up appearances. And today's the follow-up inspection." Her hands shook slightly as she gathered Hollis's warmest clothes. "I can't just sit here." A pause, then. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. We'll take my truck. It handles better in the snow." Relief flooded through her. "Wes, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do, and you know it." By the time Wes's truck pulled up, the snow was falling in thick white sheets. Wind howled around the corners of the house, and the temperature had plummeted. Tessa bundled Hollis in layers, secured him in his car seat, and let Bishop jump in beside him. The big dog immediately pressed close to the baby, sharing warmth. Wes didn't question her decision or try to talk her out of it. He simply helped her into the truck and started carefully navigating the increasingly treacherous roads. The usually 20-minute drive took nearly 45 minutes, with abandoned cars already littering the shoulders. As they approached Little Lanterns, Tessa spotted several cars in the parking lot. "She's still open," she whispered, horror and anger mixing in her chest. "In this weather?" Through the swirling snow, they could make out lights in the windows. Not electrical lights, but the orange glow of emergency lanterns. And something else, a deeper orange flickering from the basement windows. "That's not emergency lighting," Wes said sharply, pulling into the lot. "That looks like—" "The old furnace," Tessa finished. "The one that was supposed to be decommissioned last year." Her heart started pounding. She's trying to keep the place warm for the inspector, but that thing hasn't been serviced in years. They rushed from the truck, fighting against the wind. Bishop stayed with Hollis, both secure in the heated cab. Through the front windows, they could see Pamela leading someone, presumably the inspector, through the rooms, gesturing proudly at the emergency preparations she'd made. "She's going to get someone killed," Tessa breathed, watching the children huddled in their cribs, some looking unnaturally still. The gas lines to that furnace are ancient, and with no power for proper ventilation. Wes was already pulling out his phone, fingers clumsy with cold, as he dialed emergency services. But in this weather, how long would help take to arrive? The orange glow from the basement grew stronger, casting strange shadows through the snow. Tessa could smell it now, the sharp, dangerous scent of old gas lines straining under sudden use. Pamela's voice drifted through the door as she approached it, still playing tour guide while lives hung in the balance. "As you can see, we're fully prepared for any emergency. The children's comfort and safety are always our top priority." Tessa's hands clenched into fists. The same lies, the same false concern, while carbon monoxide potentially built up in the poorly ventilated space. How many more children would suffer before Pamela's facade finally cracked? The wind screamed around them, driving the snow horizontal. Inside, the furnace's glow grew brighter, a hungry orange heart beating beneath the building. The darkness of the storm pressed in, matching the darkness of what was happening behind those walls. They had to act. But one wrong move could bring the whole corrupt system down on their heads. The inspector's presence made everything more volatile. One word from Pamela about Tessa being a disturbed parent under investigation, and any warning they tried to give would be dismissed. The deadly convergence of literal and moral darkness was complete. Now they just had to find a way through it before it was too late. The distant sound of barking cut through the howling wind. Tessa's head snapped up, her eyes widening in recognition. "That's Bishop," she breathed, "but I left him in the truck with Hollis." Wes cursed under his breath. "That dog can get out of anything when he's determined, like someone else I know." Despite the gravity of the situation, there was a hint of admiration in his voice. They rounded the corner of the building to find Bishop throwing himself against the nap room's exterior door, his powerful body vibrating with urgency. His barks weren't aggressive. They held the same desperate quality they'd had the day he'd alerted to Hollis's distress. Through the window, Tessa could see children lying unnaturally still in their cribs. A thin haze hung in the air, invisible but deadly. The carbon monoxide detector on the wall was flashing red, its warning signal silenced. Pamela appeared in the doorway, her perfectly styled hair beginning to wilt in the growing humidity. She reached for the detector, pressing buttons with manicured fingers until its warning lights died completely. "Just a malfunction," she assured the inspector smoothly. "These things are so sensitive." Bishop's barking grew more frantic. He pawed at the door, then at the ground, performing the exact pressure alert sequence Grant had trained him to use, the same sequence that had saved Hollis. "He's detecting the fumes," Tessa whispered, her voice thick with horror. "The furnace, it's filling the whole building with carbon monoxide, and she's ignoring it. Those babies." She took a step forward, but Wes caught her arm. "We need to be smart about this," he warned. "One wrong move and she'll have security throw us out before we can help anyone." Bishop continued his desperate warning, his deep barks echoing off the snow-covered ground, each one a cry for help that only Tessa seemed to understand. Tessa didn't hesitate. She grabbed a rock from the snow-covered ground and smashed the window. The glass shattered, and immediately a wave of poisoned air rushed out. The sickly sweet smell made her head spin. "Cover your mouth!" Wes shouted, pulling his shirt over his nose. He helped boost Tessa through the window, then followed her inside. Bishop bounded past them both, his nose low to the ground as he moved with purpose through the haze. He went straight to Hollis's crib, then began moving systematically from one sleeping child to the next, nudging them with his nose. "Get them out!" Tessa called, already lifting the first child, a little girl with blonde pigtails who felt terrifyingly limp in her arms. Wes worked alongside her, both of them fighting through burning eyes and dizzy spells to reach each crib. They heard Pamela's heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. "Stop right there!" Wes shouted, but she was already running. Her designer bag caught on a door handle, spilling its contents. Prescription bottles scattered across the floor, their labels clearly showing sedatives that should never have been near children. Wes sprinted after her, tackling her just before she reached the exit. She fought like a wild animal, but he held firm. "It's over, Pamela," he growled. "Those bottles tell the whole story." Through the thinning haze, Bishop stood guard over the rescued children, his alert posture never wavering. His amber eyes met Tessa's, and in that moment, she saw what Grant had always known. This wasn't just a dog, but a guardian angel with 4 paws and an unwavering heart. The ancient furnace sputtered and groaned, belching thick black smoke into the already hazy room. Through the chaos, Bishop's ears perked up at a faint cry. Without hesitation, he darted toward a forgotten corner of the nursery, where a small bassinet lay hidden behind storage boxes. Gripping the edge of the bassinet with his teeth, Bishop began dragging it toward the exit. Inside, a tiny infant whimpered, barely conscious. The smoke grew thicker, but Bishop refused to let go, his powerful muscles straining as he pulled his precious cargo to safety. Outside, the familiar wail of fire engines pierced the night. Grant's old crew from Station 23 arrived, their faces grim as they recognized Tessa. They worked quickly, containing the blaze before it could spread further. As paramedics checked the children, police officers converged on Pamela and Councilman Mullen. The toxicology reports came back positive. Traces of sedatives were found in multiple children's systems. The evidence was irrefutable. "You're under arrest," an officer announced, snapping handcuffs onto Pamela's wrists, while another officer did the same to Mullen. The councilman's face had lost all its usual smugness as he was led away. Bishop stood watch over the rescued children, his duty fulfilled. Parents hugged their little ones, casting grateful looks at the dog who had exposed the truth and saved their children. He wasn't just a rescue dog anymore. He was a hero who had brought justice to Light Lanterns Daycare. 6 weeks after the fire, Tessa sat in the sunlit kitchen, watching Bishop and Hollis play on the floor. The official letter from Child Protective Services lay open on the table, a complete clearance of all allegations, along with a formal apology for their rushed judgment. "Look at them," Wes said softly, setting down 2 steaming cups of coffee. Bishop's got his own certification now. Medical alert dog, just like Grant always knew he could be. The morning news played quietly in the background, showing footage of Pamela Voss and Councilman Mullen being led into the courthouse. Their trial for corruption and child endangerment had begun, with multiple families coming forward to testify. Hollis's delighted giggle filled the room as Bishop gently nuzzled him. The sound wrapped around Tessa's heart, no longer weighted by grief, but lifted by gratitude. She reached for Wes's hand, allowing herself to feel the warmth of new possibilities. "Grant would be proud," she whispered, watching Bishop settle protectively beside Hollis's playmat. He knew what Bishop was capable of all along. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the silver tag on Bishop's new certification collar. Hollis reached up, patting Bishop's muzzle with complete trust, while the dog's amber eyes maintained their constant, loving vigilance. For the first time in years, Tessa felt whole again, her family safe, justice served, and her heart open to both the memories of what was and the promise of what could be. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.